Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And today, as I am currently speaking, and over the last several hours, there is currently a large Russian missile attack underway against various targets across Ukraine. We believe the initial attack by Russia upon targets inside of Ukraine were of the ballistic missile type. It appears that the Ukrainian Air Defense Network did not see these systems coming in. These ballistic or semi-ballistic missiles. These could have been Iskanders. These could have been modified S-300s with GPS receivers. These could have even been hypersonic systems as well. Deployed by the Russians. We also believe that a second round of missile attacks is either underway or very close to being underway as we speak. But again, targets have been hit in Kiev. They've been hit on both the right and left bank, or the east and west bank of the Dnieper River near Kiev. And there has been targets hit in western Ukraine. There have been targets hit in eastern Ukraine as well, especially near Kharkov and other cities as well. And we can expect to see this continue by Russian forces. The Russians are going to continue to target command and control, and obviously the heat, the power, the infrastructure of the Ukrainian state. And that is compounding the effects of going after command and control targets. It's also going to wear on the civil populace and the actual spirit of the fighting forces as well. If these forces on the front line aren't able to go back to the rear and essentially get warm and experience some of the accoutrements of a modern society, well, that is going to wear on those forces. Maybe not as much as some, but it is going to have an impact. Furthermore, we are continuing to see heavy fighting taking place near Soledar. So the Russians have, for all intents and purposes, seized control of Soledar, but we do see a significant amount of Ukrainian forces very close to Soledar. If you look at our map here, you have Soledar in this area, and then you have the deployment of the Ukrainian brigades that are attempting to either look to recapture Soledar or look to prevent a Russian breakout in the direction of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. And there is a significant Ukrainian force construct near Soledar. You've got 2 armored brigades. You have elements of 2 airborne brigades, and then you have 3 mechanized brigades as well, assigned to preventing a breakout near Soledar and or a possible effort to recapture Soledar. As well, you have other forces, including territorial defense brigades, operating very close to Soledar as well. But again, very heavy fighting continues. Lots of heavy artillery being used by both sides. Large-scale infantry battles are taking place near Soledar. Now, we haven't seen any major maneuver operations as of yet by Russian forces looking to exploit the seizure of Soledar. Now, with that being said, we do anticipate the Russians are planning something. What that something is, we simply don't know yet. We could be seeing a lot of deception operations by the Russians going on right now, especially near in and around Belarus. We continue to hear reports of more Russian forces being brought into Belarus. Now, these forces that are being brought in, some of them with the infamous white Z on their vehicles, Again, we don't believe at this point there is the appropriate force construct by Russian forces to mass in this area and then launch an effective operation towards Kiev. Another operation or another possibility that the Russians could be looking at is something occurring in the Brest region or south of Brest towards Lviv. That would be more remote than an operation towards Kiev, but nonetheless, I think it's something that the Ukrainians possibly need to prepare for. I wouldn't rule anything out at this point. But again, as I've talked about in previous videos, I believe at this point, more likely than not, we'll see something in the direction of Chernihiv, Sumy, or the Kharkov areas by Russian forces, meaning a offensive operation by Russian forces coming out of Belgorod, Kursk, or coming out of Bryansk towards Chernihiv and or Sumy. But again, we just don't know yet. But what we do know, as we've talked about on the previous video, is there are major efforts underway right now by the Russian Federation to expand its armed forces, to enlarge its armed forces, and give itself what I would define as multiple capabilities to attack Ukraine. So obviously we heard about the conscription of those 300,000 plus personnel into the Russian army. We believe that efforts are being made right now to recruit an additional 500,000, possibly more. Those efforts, quite honestly, are already underway, in my opinion. But with that being said, as I've talked about before, that I don't believe we'll see a major Russian offensive until the summer or late summer. Again, people talk and they discuss the possibility of something happening in the springtime or early spring, late spring. Not sure if the Russians will be ready for that yet, but we'll definitely stand by, continue to watch, and see what happens. In other news, the U.S. military-industrial complex, the larger defense contractors such as Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, the Department of Defense, and especially the Navy, is becoming very concerned about the ability of these defense contractors to produce adequate amounts of missiles, weapon systems, ammunition, munitions for the U.S. military, while at the same time trying to supply regional allies with weapon systems as well. And we've heard recent statements out of naval commanders saying that if there were to be a large-scale conflict break out between China and the United States could struggle in terms of being able to supply itself with the amount of munitions needed to fight China. And I think what we're learning in this ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, realistically, this is the first conflict in which you see two very large industrialized nations going at each other in all-out war. And what we're learning as war changes, that the need for large amounts of precision-guided munition, large amounts of missiles, large amounts of even heavy artillery, maybe not so smart munitions, is probably needed more than first anticipated. It does appear that both sides, again, are going through massive amounts of ammunition and munitions in this ongoing conflict. And much like in the early days of World War I, it was glaringly apparent during World War I, or the entry stages of World War I, that both the Germans and the French and the Russians during World War I and the British were going through huge amounts of munitions, much more than they at first thought they would indeed need to use. And I think what we're seeing right now in this conflict is essentially the same thing. Both sides are using much more than they originally thought they were going to use. And I think the United States Navy, the U.S. Air Force, it is now dawning on those force commands that the United States may not be fully prepared for the amount of munitions that they are going to need to expend against, say, China and then possibly even the Russian Federation if we see World War III break out. And I know that's, you're saying, World War III breakout. What? Look, we are heading closer towards that happening than it not happening. So I hope that makes sense. And the very, very likelihood that we could see some sort of war between the Western allies, the United States, and other nation states against China, against the Russian Federation, as we have pushed the Russian Federation closer to China. The probability that we will now, us, the United States, have to fight both China and Russia is increasing. It is not decreasing. And then before I sign off, one other issue I wanted to discuss very, very quickly. It looks like the British are going to be supplying Challenger 2 main battle tanks to the Ukrainians. We don't know how many main battle tanks, Challenger 2s, the Brits are going to hand over. I would assume at first it's going to be a company-sized element, and then quite possibly more after that, up to maybe a battalion. I don't foresee the British handing over any more than a battalion of Challenger 2 main battle tanks at this point. I think this is more or less a token demonstration of saying, hey, look, we handed over main battle tanks to the Ukrainians. But is it going to change anything on the battlescape? No, it's not. It's not. And in all likelihood, we'll very, very quickly see destroyed Challenger main battle tanks once they are deployed to the front lines. Look, the Russians have the capability to destroy Challenger 2 main battle tanks. The same methods they are using to destroy upgraded T-64s and T-72s, the Russians can do the same with the Challenger 2. It may be a little bit tougher of a nut to crack, especially the frontal aspect of the Challenger, very heavily armored system. But nonetheless, a lot of what we're seeing now is top attack methodologies being used against these main battle tanks. And the Russians, we're now seeing, have top attack munitions, such as the Item 305, as I've talked about in an earlier video. While it's not as designed as, say, the Javelin for top attack, it does reach an apogee and does tend to come straight down on the turret or rear deck. But again, one of those weapon systems, all you have to do is mission kill a Challenger, and it's going to be very difficult for the Ukrainians to then repair that system. It's going to take a while to pull that system to the rear, if they are even able to do that, and then repair that system. Look, you don't have to completely destroy a main battle tank. You just have to render it where it cannot operate. Either its track cannot operate, or the turret cannot turn, the optics cannot operate, and essentially you have removed that tank from the battlefield. Now, the crew may survive, but in the end, that vehicle will no longer be serviceable. And then you have to look at the possibility that the Russians actually capture one of these systems as well, and then are able to get a good look at the Dorchester or the Chobham armor that is on those systems. But we'll see. That's where we set for today. We will continue to monitor. We will continue to report. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.